Imagine standing at the edge of a vast, indifferent universe. Everything you've ever been told about purpose, meaning, and life's grand design crumbles before your eyes. You search for answers, but the stars offer no comfort, and the universe just doesn't care. So, what do? Do you crumble under the weight of this existential void? Or do you fight back, defiantly creating your own meaning in a world that seems determined to offer none? Today, we're stepping into a conversation that's been shaping the very foundations of existential philosophy for over a century: Camus versus Beauvoir, the meaning of life debate. Albert Camus, the rebel who faced the absurdity of existence head-on, and Simone de Beauvoir, the trailblazing feminist philosopher who dared to challenge not just ideas, but the very societal structures that oppress us. Their philosophies are like two paths leading toward freedom, yet they couldn't be more different. One says, live authentically, despite the absurd, and the other insists, true freedom isn't just individual, it's a collective battle. If you've ever wondered how to find meaning in a world that feels indifferent to your existence, or if you've questioned whether individual freedom can ever be truly liberated without addressing the oppressive systems around us, then this is the debate that will open your eyes. But here's the catch. What if both are right and we've just been looking at it the wrong way all along? Stick around as we dissect their contrasting yet complementary perspectives on life, freedom, and what it truly means to live authentically. Before we dive in, don't forget to hit that like button if you're ready to challenge your own ideas about freedom and existence. Share this video with friends who love deep philosophical debates, and subscribe for more thought-provoking content. Also, if you feel inspired by today's discussion, show your support with a super thanks to help keep this conversation going. Now, let's get into it. Albert Camus and Simone de Beauvoir are two of the most prominent figures in the realm of existentialist philosophy. While both contributed significantly to the existentialist movement, their views on the meaning of life and the human condition diverged in crucial ways. Their intellectual relationship, often marked by mutual respect but also tension, significantly shaped their philosophical ideas. Camus, with his emphasis on the absurd, and Beauvoir, with her feminist existentialism, explored the human struggle for meaning in a world that appears indifferent to our existence. Understanding their philosophies requires first understanding the historical and intellectual context in which they emerged and how their ideas reflected the anxieties and challenges of the 20th century. Existentialism, at its core, is a philosophical movement that focuses on the individual's experience of existence. It emerged as a response to the disillusionment that followed World War II, a time when traditional beliefs about religion, morality, and human progress were being questioned. The central tenets of existentialism are individual freedom, the search for meaning in an inherently meaningless world, and the recognition of the absurdity of life. Existentialists argue that we are thrown into a world without inherent meaning, and it is up to us to create meaning through our choices and actions. Camus, born in Algeria in 1913, is often associated with the philosophy of the absurd. His most famous works, such as The Stranger and The Myth of Sisyphus, explore the idea that life's inherent meaninglessness forces individuals to confront what he calls the absurd. Camus defined the absurd as the tension between our longing for meaning and the cold, indifferent universe that offers none. This realization, according to Camus, leads to a crisis of meaning, one that cannot be resolved through traditional religious or philosophical answers. Instead, Camus proposed a rebellious affirmation of life, advocating that we must live fully and authentically, despite the lack of any ultimate purpose. Simone de Beauvoir, born in Paris in 1908, is perhaps best known for her work The Second Sex, where she examines the oppression of women through the lens of existential philosophy. A close companion and intellectual partner of Jean-Paul Sartre, de Beauvoir shared many existentialist ideas but extended them in new and important directions. While Camus grappled with the absurdity of existence in a general sense, de Beauvoir applied existentialist principles to the particular oppression faced by women. She argued that women had historically been relegated to the status of the other, a concept she borrowed from Sartre, meaning that they had been defined by men and by societal structures rather than by their own agency. Beauvoir's existential feminism challenged the male-dominated world of traditional philosophy and called for a society in which women could fully realize their freedom. Their relationship, both personal and intellectual, was complex. Camus and de Beauvoir initially shared a mutual admiration, but their differing philosophical outlooks led to disagreements. One of the most significant points of contention was their views on freedom. Camus believed that freedom was found in the individual's confrontation with the absurd. A freedom that comes from rejecting all false hopes and living authentically. For de Beauvoir, however, true freedom was inextricably tied to social and political conditions. She argued that women's freedom could not be realized without the dismantling of patriarchal systems. While Camus focused on personal rebellion against the absurd, de Beauvoir saw existential freedom as something that must be achieved collectively, particularly through the liberation of women. In terms of existentialism as a whole, the movement is centered around the individual's responsibility to define their existence in a world that offers no inherent purpose. Existentialists believe that humans are condemned to freedom, meaning that we are responsible for our actions and choices. There is no God or preordained meaning to guide us. Instead, we must navigate life and make meaning from our own experiences. This view can be liberating, but it can also be deeply unsettling, as it means that we are entirely responsible for the meaning we create and the values we choose to adopt. For Camus, the most essential element of existentialism is the recognition of the absurd. This is the awareness that the universe does not provide us with answers, and that any attempt to impose meaning onto it is ultimately futile. Yet, Camus does not advocate for despair. Instead, he suggests that we must confront the absurd with defiance and continue to live fully. The absurd hero, epitomized by the figure of Sisyphus in his famous essay, represents this spirit of rebellion. Even though Sisyphus is condemned to roll a boulder up a hill for eternity, he persists, finding meaning not in the outcome but in the struggle itself. For Camus, it is in embracing this struggle, in living authentically despite the absence of meaning, that we find true freedom. Beauvoir, on the other hand, extended the existentialist framework to address the lived experience of women, who, she argued, had been denied the freedom to define themselves. She critiqued the existential tradition for ignoring the unique challenges women face in a patriarchal society. In The Second Sex, Beauvoir famously wrote, "One is not born, but rather becomes, a woman," pointing out that gender is a social construct, not a natural given. She believed that women were trapped in an oppressive system that denied them the ability to define their own existence. The concept of the other was key to her understanding of gender inequality. Men had historically been defined as the norm, while women were seen as the other, secondary to the male experience. This made it impossible for women to experience true existential freedom. Beauvoir's feminist existentialism challenges the idea that freedom can be fully realized in isolation. While Camus emphasized the individual's responsibility to confront the absurd, Beauvoir insisted that freedom could only be fully actualized within a collective context, where social structures that oppress women could be dismantled. She argued that the existential struggle for meaning and freedom must include a social dimension, one where the liberation of women and the rejection of oppressive norms is central. Her ideas have had a profound impact on feminist philosophy, influencing movements for gender equality and women's liberation throughout the 20th and 21st centuries. Both Camus and Beauvoir were grappling with the same existential questions. What is the meaning of life? How do we navigate a world that offers no easy answers? Yet their answers were shaped by their unique perspectives. Camus, ever the individualist, emphasized personal freedom and the need to confront the absurd alone. Beauvoir, however, viewed existential freedom as something that could not be achieved without addressing the broader social structures that limit individuals, particularly women. While Camus advocated for a solitary rebellion against the absurd, Beauvoir called for a collective effort to dismantle the societal systems that prevent individuals from realizing their true freedom. Together, Camus and Beauvoir represent two sides of the existentialist debate, one that focuses on individual autonomy and the other on collective liberation. Their intellectual legacy continues to influence contemporary philosophy, particularly in the areas of gender, freedom, and the search for meaning in a world that often seems indifferent to our existence. Their ideas challenge us to think about the nature of freedom, the role of society, and the personal responsibility we each bear in creating meaning in our lives. Albert Camus, one of the most influential philosophers of the 20th century, is best known for his exploration of what he called the absurd, the fundamental conflict between the human desire for meaning and the universe's inherent indifference and meaninglessness. In his works, particularly The Myth of Sisyphus, Camus presents the idea that life, at its core, is devoid of any inherent purpose or value. This realization is the absurd, the paradox that humans strive for meaning and understanding. Yet the universe offers no answers. The clash between these two, human longing and cosmic indifference, is the crux of the human condition according to Camus. The concept of the absurd arises from the simple observation that we, as human beings, inherently seek purpose. We want our lives to matter, to have significance, to be part of a larger narrative. Yet, when we look at the world around us, when we examine the vastness of the universe, we are met with silence. The universe, indifferent to our desires, offers no answers to our questions. There are no ultimate truths, no divine purpose guiding us. The stars do not care about our struggles, and the earth continues to spin without regard to the questions we ask about the meaning of life. The absurd emerges from the realization that we exist in a universe that is indifferent, if not entirely hostile, to our need for meaning. In this way, the absurd is not something that can be solved or transcended. It is a condition that we must face and come to terms with. For Camus, this confrontation with the absurd is not a cause for despair but an invitation to live more authentically. Rather than succumbing to nihilism or resorting to false hopes, Camus believes that we must embrace the absurd and continue living fully. His famous metaphor of Sisyphus, the Greek mythological figure condemned to roll a boulder up a hill only for it to roll back down again for eternity, captures this concept perfectly. Camus sees Sisyphus as the ultimate absurd hero. Despite his eternal and futile task, Sisyphus does not give in to despair. He continues to push the boulder up the hill, not because he expects to ever succeed but because the act of pushing the boulder itself is what gives his existence meaning. For Camus, it is not the end result that matters, but the effort and the will to continue in the face of meaninglessness. Camus calls this act of continuing in the face of the absurd, rebellious affirmation. To rebel against the absurd is not to deny it or try to escape it, but rather to accept it and choose to live authentically despite it. It is a declaration that, while the universe may be indifferent, we still have the power to create meaning in our lives through our actions. Rebellious affirmation means rejecting the temptation to look for false comfort in religion, philosophy, or ideologies that promise to resolve the absurd. Instead, it means embracing life as it is, with all its uncertainty, imperfection, and transience. This idea of rebellious affirmation is not a call to passivity, but rather an encouragement to live fully in the present, to engage with life on our own terms. It is the refusal to succumb to despair, the refusal to surrender to a world that offers no easy answers. Camus believed that meaning in life is not something that is given to us from the outside but something we must create for ourselves. In the face of the absurd, we have the power to affirm our existence by living authentically, by fully engaging with the world around us and with other people. Despite its inherent meaninglessness, the notion of rebellious affirmation is, in many ways, an act of defiance. It is the human spirit's refusal to be crushed by the weight of the absurd. Camus draws a stark distinction between those who attempt to escape the absurd by creating false narratives and those who face it head-on. The former seek comfort in religion, philosophy, or illusions of hope, while the latter, the absurd hero, chooses to live without such illusions. Embracing the absurd as a condition of human existence, Camus urges us to live fully, to find joy in the small moments of life, to celebrate our existence even though it may not have any ultimate purpose. An important aspect of Camus' philosophy is the recognition that this rebellion does not require grand gestures or heroism. Rather, it can be found in the everyday actions of people living ordinary lives. Even when faced with the inherent absurdity of existence, we can choose to act in ways that bring joy, purpose, and meaning to our lives. Take, for example, the act of engaging in art or creative expression. For Camus, the act of creating something, a painting, a song, a poem, is an example of rebellious affirmation. It is a way of asserting our freedom and creating meaning in a world that offers none. The artist, by creating something out of nothing, stands in defiance of the absurd. Similarly, a person who chooses to live fully and authentically, enjoying the pleasures of life, relationships, and experiences, is also engaging in this rebellion. Camus' ideas are particularly resonant in a world that often feels overwhelming and uncertain. We live in a time when many people feel disconnected from the larger narratives of meaning and purpose that once guided human life. Global crises, environmental destruction, and political instability contribute to a sense of existential dread. In these times, Camus' philosophy offers a way forward. It tells us that, even in the face of crisis, we have the power to choose how we live. We can affirm life through our actions, whether it be through small acts of kindness, creativity, or simply by engaging with the world around us in an authentic way. Moreover, Camus' philosophy suggests that this affirmation of life is not just an individual pursuit, but a collective one. While Camus is often seen as an individualist, his emphasis on rebellion and authenticity also speaks to the need for solidarity with others. By affirming our own existence in the face of absurdity, we affirm the existence of others. Recognizing that we are all in this together, the rebellious affirmation of life becomes a shared endeavor, a communal act of defiance against the meaninglessness that surrounds us. In this sense, Camus' philosophy is not just about individual freedom, but about the creation of a collective meaning, a shared struggle to live authentically in a world that offers no inherent answers. In practice, rebellious affirmation can be seen in the actions of individuals who, despite the chaos and uncertainty around them, choose to live with purpose and passion. This can be seen in the lives of people who dedicate themselves to causes greater than themselves, to social justice, to art, or to the pursuit of knowledge. These individuals, in their determination to live fully and authentically, embody Camus' notion of rebellion. They confront the absurdity of existence and, rather than retreating from it, they engage with it, using their actions to create meaning in an otherwise meaningless world. At its core, Camus' philosophy is a call to live with courage and integrity, to confront the absurd with open eyes, and to find meaning in the simple act of living itself. In a world that often seems indifferent to our desires and struggles, Camus urges us to live fully, to embrace the present moment, and to create our own meaning through our choices. His philosophy is a reminder that, while we may not find ultimate answers or resolutions, we can still find joy, purpose, and fulfillment in the journey itself. It is a philosophy of defiance, a rebellion against the absurd, and an affirmation of the human spirit's capacity to create meaning in the face of meaninglessness. Simone de Beauvoir's existential feminism marks a crucial turning point in both existentialist philosophy and feminist theory. While existentialism as a whole emphasizes individual freedom, personal responsibility, and the search for meaning, Beauvoir critiques and expands these ideas by introducing a focus on gender and the social constructs that limit women's freedom. She recognized that the same principles of existentialism that championed individual autonomy and self-definition were not fully applicable to women, who, due to deeply ingrained societal structures, were often denied the ability to exercise this freedom. In her seminal work, The Second Sex, Beauvoir explores how traditional existentialism failed to address the realities of women's lives. Existentialism, as championed by philosophers like Jean-Paul Sartre and Albert Camus, largely centered on male experiences of freedom, agency, and meaning-making. These thinkers, while acknowledging the absurdity of existence and the struggle for meaning, did not take into account the particular forms of oppression that women experienced. Beauvoir argued that existentialism, in its traditional form, was not truly universal. It was rooted in a male-centric worldview. The freedom that existentialism promised was, for women, a distant ideal, as society had already placed significant barriers in the way of women's ability to fully participate in the existential project of self-definition. A core component of Beauvoir's critique of traditional existentialism is her concept of the other. This idea draws heavily from Jean-Paul Sartre's philosophy of the other, where individuals define themselves through their relationships with others. However, Beauvoir takes this concept further by applying it to the social dynamics of gender. In a patriarchal society, women are often defined as the other in relation to men, who are seen as the default, the norm, the standard by which all else is measured. Men occupy the position of the self, while women are relegated to the position of the other. This creates a situation in which women are viewed not as fully autonomous beings but as secondary, subordinate, and dependent on men for their identity. The consequences of this dynamic are far-reaching. The societal construction of women as the other has historically confined them to rigid and oppressive roles that were often centered around domestic duties, caregiving, and subservience to men. In Beauvoir's view, the societal image of women as the other perpetuates their marginalization and limits their potential for freedom. Women, she argues, have been taught to define themselves through their relationships with men, to see themselves as reflections of men's desires, needs, and expectations, rather than as autonomous individuals with the right to define their own existence. This social construction of womanhood as something defined by others, rather than by the individual woman herself, is one of the key barriers to women's existential freedom. Beauvoir's critique of women's socialization is powerful and complex. She argued that women's role in society has been largely dictated by men and that the values, roles, and expectations placed on women are not inherent to their nature but are socially constructed. Women's freedom has been systematically suppressed through a combination of cultural, religious, and economic forces that have confined them to narrow roles. From the time of birth, women are socialized into these roles, with little room for deviation. They are taught to be passive, to prioritize the needs of others, and to accept a subordinate position in relation to men. This socialization is so deeply ingrained that it becomes invisible, almost natural, leading many women to internalize their oppression. Beauvoir contends that these societal structures prevent women from realizing their full potential as free and autonomous beings. In order for women to experience true existential freedom, they must break free from the societal constraints that define them as the other. This means challenging the roles and expectations imposed on them by society, rejecting the idea that a woman's worth is determined by her relationship to men, and asserting the right to define herself on her own terms. Beauvoir's feminist existentialism, then, is not just a philosophical critique, it is a call to action. It calls on women to claim their freedom and to resist the societal forces that seek to confine them. The liberation of women, according to Beauvoir, is intrinsically tied to the dismantling of patriarchal structures. She argues that existential freedom, in its truest sense, can only be realized when women are no longer defined by the roles that society has imposed upon them. Women's emancipation, then, is not simply a matter of legal rights or political equality. It is a fundamental shift in how society understands and values women. For Beauvoir, true freedom requires the rejection of the social structures that create and maintain gender-based oppression. One of the ways Beauvoir connects existential freedom to the feminist movement is by recognizing the importance of women's agency. In traditional existentialism, agency is a central concept. The individual is responsible for defining their own existence and making choices that give their life meaning. However, for women, this agency has often been denied. Women's choices have been restricted by societal expectations, laws, and cultural norms. Beauvoir's feminist existentialism seeks to restore this agency, allowing women to exercise the same freedom that existentialism promises to all human beings. She calls on women to refuse to accept the roles that have been imposed on them and to instead take responsibility for their own lives and their own freedom. This means rejecting the notion that women are born to fulfill predefined roles and instead embracing the idea that women, like men, are free to choose their own paths. Beauvoir also highlights the importance of solidarity in the fight for women's freedom. While existentialism is often seen as a philosophy of individual freedom and autonomy, Beauvoir emphasizes that the liberation of women is not solely an individual pursuit. It is a collective endeavor that requires solidarity among women and between women and men who support their emancipation. She advocates for a society in which women are free to live their lives as they choose, without the constraints of gender-based expectations or limitations. This requires not only individual resistance but also social and political action to change the structures that perpetuate gender inequality. Her ideas were revolutionary in the context of her time, particularly when viewed against the backdrop of post-war society. The 1940s and 1950s, when The Second Sex was first published, were a time when women's roles were still largely confined to the domestic sphere. The feminist movements of the time had not yet reached the scale of the movements that would emerge in the 1960s and 1970s. And women were still largely excluded from many areas of public and professional life. Beauvoir's work was groundbreaking in that it challenged the very notion of what it meant to be a woman in a patriarchal society. By applying existentialist principles to the feminist movement, Beauvoir not only advanced feminist theory but also redefined the parameters of freedom and agency. Her philosophy continues to resonate today. As the fight for gender equality and women's liberation remains ongoing, Beauvoir's critique of women's socialization, her call for women to reclaim their agency, and her insistence that true freedom can only be realized when women are no longer confined to socially constructed roles are as relevant now as they were in her time. Her work has been foundational in the development of feminist philosophy and has influenced countless feminist thinkers and activists in the years since its publication. Beauvoir's existential feminism represents a radical rethinking of both existentialist philosophy and feminist theory. By integrating the existentialist focus on freedom and personal responsibility with a critique of gender-based oppression, she created a powerful framework for understanding and challenging the social structures that limit women's potential. Her work continues to inspire those who seek to understand the complexities of gender, freedom, and the human condition, and it remains a cornerstone of both existentialism and feminist thought. Camus. You see, Simone, I find the human condition to be fundamentally absurd. Life, in its essence, is meaningless. The universe offers no answers to our longing for meaning. It is indifferent. Yet, in this very absurdity, I find a certain kind of freedom. When we come to terms with the fact that life is devoid of inherent purpose, we are free to live authentically. We are not burdened by the weight of expectations that come from some divine order or preordained meaning. To confront the absurd is to rebel against it. To affirm life, not because it holds meaning but because we have the power to live fully despite its meaninglessness. Beauvoir. I understand your view, Albert, but I must respectfully disagree. Your focus on individual freedom, on the individual's rebellion against the absurd, is compelling. But it overlooks the social structures that limit freedom, especially for women. You speak of living authentically in a meaningless world. But how can one truly be free when society oppresses them? Can a woman, defined by centuries of oppression, really achieve the kind of existential freedom you describe? I argue that freedom cannot be purely individual. True freedom, particularly for women, requires a transformation of society, a dismantling of the structures that define us as the other. Camus. I see what you're saying, but I believe that even within the oppressive structures of society, the individual can still choose freedom. The world is inherently absurd, Simone, and we have no control over the systems that govern us. But in the face of that, we have the power to reject false comforts and live authentically. One doesn't need to wait for society to change in order to live fully. The freedom I speak of is internal. It's about how we confront the absurdity of existence and how we choose to live in spite of it. We are all condemned to freedom. In a sense, we can make meaning through our actions, regardless of the circumstances. Beauvoir. But that's the point. Albert, you're talking about a freedom that is available to those who are not constrained by the weight of social and cultural expectations. Men, for example, may have the luxury of choosing freedom in the way you describe. But women are systematically denied that freedom. The roles imposed on women by society are not just external pressures, they are internalized. Women are taught from birth to accept their place, to see themselves as defined by their relationships to men, to view themselves as other. This socialization makes it impossible for many women to exercise the freedom you speak of. Their very identity has been shaped by oppressive systems. Camus. Yes, but the absurd is universal. It affects everyone equally. It is not limited to gender or race. The very nature of existence, this absurd struggle against a meaningless world, applies to all of us. A woman can rebel against the absurd just as much as a man can. Her freedom does not need to be tied to societal change. It is an individual act of rebellion. We are all responsible for our own existence, for the meaning we choose to create. Even a woman confined by societal expectations has the power to choose how she reacts to her circumstances. Beauvoir. I see your point, Albert, but I think you are simplifying the struggle. Women do not simply react to the world in the same way that men do. The oppression they face is not just an external challenge. but a deeply ingrained part of their experience. The rebellion you speak of cannot be fully realized when one is constantly battling against societal expectations. When one's choices are limited by those very structures, women are often taught to see themselves as objects, as tools for the desires and needs of men. How can a woman rebel when she has not been allowed to define herself in the first place? Camus. I understand your concern, but I believe that rebellion is still possible. Even within these constraints, I think you are looking for liberation within the framework of social justice. While I focus more on personal liberation, the absurd hero, for instance, is someone who refuses to give in to despair, no matter how difficult their circumstances. Even in the face of a world that offers no meaning, they choose to live fully. I think that any individual, regardless of gender, can confront the absurd and affirm their existence. Beauvoir. But Albert, what you fail to acknowledge is that women's liberation requires not just a change in individual perspective but a change in society. You talk about rebellion, but the reality is that many women cannot even recognize their own oppression. They have been so thoroughly socialized into accepting their subjugation that they cannot even imagine a life of true freedom. It is not just a matter of living authentically within a meaningless world. It is about breaking free from the societal structures that have kept them in bondage. You speak of living fully in the face of absurdity. But for women, that absurdity is compounded by the oppression they face on a daily basis. How can one find meaning in a world that actively tries to define them as inferior? Camus. That's where I think we differ fundamentally. Simone. I argue that meaning is created through the act of rebellion itself. Life does not provide meaning, but we create it through our actions and choices. The act of living authentically, in the face of an indifferent universe, is the ultimate rebellion. It is through our actions that we assert our freedom, even if that freedom seems limited. I see no reason why a woman cannot create meaning in her life, even in the face of societal constraints. Beauvoir. But, Albert, freedom cannot exist in isolation. It must be linked to social and political structures. You cannot ignore the fact that the constraints on women are not just psychological, they're tangible, institutional, and pervasive. The world is not neutral. It is shaped by power dynamics that actively restrict women's freedom. For women to experience true freedom, they must be able to break free from the roles society has imposed on them. They must be able to define themselves outside of the other, outside of the expectations placed on them by men and by society. Only then can they engage in the kind of rebellion you speak of. Camus. I can see how our differences lie in our emphasis on the individual versus the collective. You argue that societal change is necessary for individual freedom, particularly for women. I believe that even within an oppressive society, individuals can find their own freedom by rejecting the absurd and living authentically. The absurd does not discriminate, it touches everyone, regardless of gender. But I understand your point. I cannot deny that societal constraints are real and that they impact a person's ability to live freely. Perhaps our views are not as far apart as they seem, perhaps. In the end, it is about how we find meaning in a world that offers none, whether as individuals or as part of a collective struggle. Beauvoir. Yes, perhaps it is. Albert. I still believe that true freedom for women can only be realized when society acknowledges their autonomy and dismantles the structures that define them as the other. But, in the end, I agree that we must all confront the absurdity of existence. The difference lies in how we define the means of liberation, whether it is through personal rebellion or through collective action. Both are necessary, but one cannot exist without the other. Camus. Perhaps both paths are intertwined. Individual rebellion against the absurd and the collective struggle for freedom might be two sides of the same coin. After all, in a world as absurd as this one, the only true meaning we have is the meaning we create, together or alone. Through this dialogue, the tension between Camus and Beauvoir's philosophies becomes clear. While Camus emphasizes the individual's responsibility to confront the absurd and live authentically, Beauvoir argues that true freedom can only be achieved when the social structures that oppress women are dismantled. They both wrestle with the question of meaning and existence, yet their answers diverge sharply. For Camus, the freedom to live authentically exists within the absurdity of existence itself, whereas Beauvoir sees freedom as inherently bound to the liberation of women from the social structures that confine them. Both, however, agree on the importance of creating meaning in a world that offers none. But the way in which meaning is created through individual rebellion or social change remains the central point of disagreement. The tension between personal agency and societal structures is one of the most significant and enduring debates in philosophy. Especially when we examine the works of Albert Camus and Simone de Beauvoir. Camus, with his focus on individual freedom and autonomy in the face of absurdity, emphasizes the power of personal choice in determining one's path. Beauvoir, on the other hand, highlights the importance of societal structures in shaping individual freedom, particularly the role these structures play in the oppression of women. While Camus' existentialism champions personal rebellion against the absurd, Beauvoir's feminist existentialism challenges the very premise of personal freedom by asserting that true autonomy cannot be realized without addressing the external social constraints that limit individuals, particularly women. Camus' philosophy is rooted in the idea of agency, the individual's power to choose and define their own existence in a meaningless and indifferent universe. For Camus, the absurd arises from the conflict between our desire for meaning and the universe's indifference to that desire. This tension forces us to confront a central question: how should we live in a world without inherent meaning? For Camus, the answer lies in rebellion. The individual's rebellion against the absurd is not an act of defiance against society or external forces. Rather, it is a confrontation with the very nature of existence itself. In a world that offers no ultimate answers, we must create meaning through our own choices, through the way we live and act in the face of absurdity. In his essay The Myth of Sisyphus, Camus uses the image of Sisyphus, the Greek figure condemned to roll a boulder up a hill only for it to roll back down every time, as a metaphor for human existence. For Camus, Sisyphus's endless struggle is not one of futile despair but an act of rebellion against the meaninglessness of life. Sisyphus, despite the absurdity of his task, continues to push the boulder up the hill. This, Camus argues, is an affirmation of life. It is the human response to the absurd. Even in a world devoid of meaning, we have the power to choose how we respond. In this way, Camus' view of agency is internal and individual. The freedom to choose how to live, even in the face of absurdity, is the core of human existence. Camus' perspective on agency is profoundly personal. He does not see external factors such as society, politics, or culture as the determining forces in an individual's life. Instead, the individual's internal struggle against the absurd is the key to achieving freedom. The power to choose how to respond to life's challenges, according to Camus, is always available to us, regardless of external conditions. In this framework, even under the most oppressive circumstances, the individual is still capable of asserting their freedom through personal choice and the rejection of false hopes or illusions. However, Beauvoir challenges this perspective, particularly in her analysis of the oppression of women, while Camus insists that existential freedom can be realized through individual rebellion against the absurd. Beauvoir argues that true freedom cannot be achieved without addressing the societal structures that limit it. For Beauvoir, these structures are not just external influences, they are internalized by individuals, shaping their very sense of identity and freedom. In The Second Sex, Beauvoir famously writes, "One is not born, but rather becomes, a woman." This statement encapsulates her view that gender is not an inherent biological fact but a social construct that shapes how women experience the world and define themselves. Women, Beauvoir argues, are socialized into a position of the other, defined in relation to men, who are seen as the norm. This societal definition of women limits their agency and freedom by prescribing roles that women are expected to fulfill. Beauvoir's concept of the other is central to understanding how she views the limitations on individual freedom. In a patriarchal society, women are viewed as secondary, as the other to the male subject. Men occupy the position of the self, the subject, the one who defines and makes choices. Women, in contrast, are defined by their relationships to men and by the role society imposes on them. This external definition of women constrains their agency, because it prevents them from fully defining themselves or exercising their freedom. Women are taught from an early age to see themselves through the lens of male desire, to view their worth in relation to how well they fulfill societal expectations of femininity. These social and cultural structures are so deeply ingrained that they often go unnoticed, becoming internalized by women themselves. As Beauvoir points out, many women do not even recognize their oppression because it is so naturalized by society. Beauvoir's feminist existentialism, therefore, emphasizes that individual freedom is inextricably linked to societal structures. True autonomy, she argues, cannot be realized as long as women are constrained by the role society imposes on them. The social structures that define women as the other limit their ability to make free choices. For Beauvoir, the solution to this problem is not simply for women to rebel against the absurd, as Camus suggests, but to confront and challenge the social systems that oppress them. True freedom for women can only be realized when these external constraints are dismantled. This is why Beauvoir places such a strong emphasis on social justice and equality, because only by addressing the external, structural limitations on women's freedom can they begin to experience genuine autonomy. The tension between personal agency and structural limitations is at the heart of the debate between Camus and Beauvoir. Camus' existentialism, with its emphasis on individual freedom, presents a vision of autonomy that is both empowering and daunting. It suggests that, regardless of the external circumstances, we have the ability to define ourselves and create meaning in our lives. For many people, this is a liberating idea. It means that even in the face of oppression, suffering, or existential dread, we still have the power to choose how we respond. Yet, as Beauvoir points out, this view overlooks the very real social and cultural forces that shape our ability to exercise that freedom. Beauvoir's critique of Camus can be seen in her insistence that freedom cannot be reduced to personal rebellion against the absurd. While Camus focuses on the individual's internal struggle, Beauvoir draws attention to the external forces that shape that struggle. Women, in particular, cannot simply choose to live authentically or to assert their freedom if they are bound by social systems that define them as less than human. As the other, the freedom that Camus speaks of, Beauvoir argues, is a freedom that is available only to those who are not constrained by the structural limitations of society. For women, this means that true freedom can only be achieved through collective action to dismantle the patriarchal structures that oppress them. The question of whether existentialism can truly be liberating if societal forces limit one's freedom is at the core of this debate. Camus argues that freedom is ultimately an internal matter, one that exists regardless of external conditions. But Beauvoir suggests that existentialism, if it is to be truly liberating, must take into account the ways in which external forces shape our experience of freedom. Personal agency, for Beauvoir, is not something that can be fully realized in a vacuum. It is deeply intertwined with the social and cultural structures that define and limit us. True existential freedom, then, is not just about rejecting the absurd or living authentically. It is about challenging the external systems that restrict our ability to live fully and freely. This tension between personal agency and structural limitations is perhaps best illustrated by looking at real-world examples. Consider, for instance, the struggle for women's rights in the 20th and 21st centuries. Women's suffrage, the fight for reproductive rights, the push for equal pay. These are all examples of how societal structures have historically limited women's freedom. While Camus' philosophy might encourage individual women to assert their autonomy in the face of these limitations, Beauvoir would argue that true freedom for women can only be achieved when these social structures are transformed. Women cannot fully exercise their agency until the structures that define them as the other are dismantled. This is why, for Beauvoir, feminism is not just about individual empowerment, it is about collective liberation. Similarly, the fight for racial equality and justice can be seen as a struggle against societal structures that limit individual freedom. While Camus' existentialism might encourage individuals to confront the absurd and assert their own meaning in the face of oppression, it is clear that structural inequality can make it difficult, if not impossible, for certain groups of people to exercise their freedom in the same way that others can. In these cases, personal agency alone is insufficient. It must be accompanied by efforts to change the social and political systems that perpetuate inequality. The debate between Camus and Beauvoir ultimately raises important questions about the nature of freedom and the ways in which it can be realized. Can existentialism truly be liberating if societal forces limit one's freedom? Is personal agency enough to overcome the structural constraints that define our lives? While Camus argues that we have the power to choose our freedom, Beauvoir insists that true freedom requires not just individual rebellion but collective action to dismantle the systems of oppression that restrict our agency. The answer to these questions, it seems, lies somewhere between the two perspectives. Personal agency and societal change must go hand in hand if we are to achieve genuine freedom for all. Albert Camus' concept of the absurd hero is one of the most striking elements of his philosophy, offering a powerful response to the fundamental question of how one should live in a world devoid of inherent meaning. Camus' absurd hero is not someone who seeks to escape the absurdity of existence, nor is he an individual who finds comfort in religious or philosophical illusions. Instead, the absurd hero fully acknowledges life's meaninglessness and the universe's indifference to human suffering, yet refuses to succumb to despair. Instead of retreating into nihilism or seeking false answers, the absurd hero chooses to live passionately, embracing life's challenges and frustrations with defiance. The absurd hero represents the human ability to confront the emptiness of existence with a spirit of rebellion and courage. Camus presents the ultimate example of this absurd hero in the figure of Sisyphus, the mythical Greek king condemned by the gods to push a boulder up a mountain only for it to roll back down every time he reaches the top. This repetitive and futile task symbolizes the human condition in a universe that offers no meaning or purpose. The absurdity lies in the fact that Sisyphus's efforts are forever doomed to fail, no matter how hard he works. The boulder will always fall. Yet Camus argues that Sisyphus can still be seen as a hero, because he continues to push the boulder up the hill without hope of success, without resignation, and without turning away from his task. Sisyphus's struggle is an affirmation of life itself, a refusal to succumb to despair or to give up simply because life is inherently meaningless. Camus famously writes, "One must imagine Sisyphus happy." This statement encapsulates the essence of absurd heroism. It suggests that, despite the absurdity of his task, Sisyphus finds a kind of meaning in the struggle itself. The act of rebellion, of continuing the task despite its futility, becomes the source of meaning. In the face of an indifferent universe, the absurd hero creates their own meaning through their actions, not by expecting an ultimate outcome, but by fully embracing the present moment. It is not the result of the struggle that matters, but the act of struggling itself, the engagement with life's challenges, no matter how futile or absurd they may seem. Sisyphus's story is not just a metaphor for the individual struggle against meaninglessness, but a reflection of the human condition. Camus contends that we, like Sisyphus, are all condemned to live in a universe that does not offer us ultimate answers or inherent meaning. The absurdity of existence is something we all face at some point in our lives, whether through personal suffering, the loss of loved ones, the awareness of our own mortality, or the general realization that life does not come with a clear purpose or direction. Yet, Camus argues, this realization does not have to lead to despair. In fact, it can be the starting point for a form of liberation. By embracing the absurd and continuing to live fully, we can affirm our existence, even if the world itself offers no intrinsic meaning. The absurd hero, then, is someone who refuses to retreat from life's challenges, who continues to strive despite the apparent futility of their efforts. This hero recognizes the inherent chaos and meaninglessness of existence but does not allow it to paralyze them. Instead, they choose to live passionately, engaging with life's difficulties and uncertainties in a way that is both authentic and rebellious. The absurd hero does not look for meaning in the traditional sense. Instead, they create meaning through their engagement with the world around them. This is what makes Camus' absurd hero so powerful rather than searching for an external source of meaning. The hero embodies meaning through their actions and choices. One of the key aspects of absurd heroism is that it requires a deep acceptance of life as it is. The absurd hero does not seek to change the fundamental nature of existence but learns to live within it. This acceptance does not mean resignation or passivity. On the contrary, it means fully embracing life's unpredictability and challenges, even when there is no promise of success or fulfillment. It is an active form of living, one that recognizes life's inherent chaos and still chooses to engage with it, not out of hope for an ultimate resolution, but because the act of living itself is valuable. In modern times, the notion of the absurd hero can be seen in individuals who continue to pursue their goals and passions despite the inherent difficulties and setbacks they face. Many people, whether in their personal or professional lives, face challenges that seem insurmountable. The artist who continues to create despite rejection. The entrepreneur who keeps pushing forward after repeated failures. The individual who faces illness or loss with resilience. These are all examples of modern-day absurd heroes. They may not have any clear answers or ultimate goals in mind, but they continue to engage with life on their own terms, finding meaning in the process itself rather than in some external, predefined outcome. Take, for example, the story of a writer who struggles to finish a novel. The writer faces constant self-doubt, rejection from publishers, and the uncertainty of whether their work will ever be appreciated. Yet, despite these challenges, the writer continues to write. They continue to create, not because they expect to achieve fame or success, but because the act of writing itself provides meaning. This is the essence of absurd heroism. The writer does not wait for the universe to offer validation or purpose but finds purpose in the act of writing. In the process of creation, the writer continues, embracing the frustration and the uncertainty. Because, in that very struggle, there is a form of freedom and meaning. Similarly, consider the example of an individual who is dealing with a personal crisis, such as the loss of a loved one or the challenge of overcoming addiction. The individual may feel overwhelmed by the absurdity of life's hardships, by the seeming lack of meaning or justice in the world. Yet, instead of succumbing to despair or retreating from life, they choose to continue. They engage with their pain, seeking healing or understanding, not because they expect to find a definitive solution but because, in confronting their suffering, they affirm their existence. They may not have control over the circumstances they face, but they can choose how to respond to them. In this way, the absurd heroism that Camus describes is embodied in those who face life's most difficult challenges with resilience and determination. This kind of heroism can be seen in the perseverance of individuals who are fighting for social justice or political change. Activists who continue to advocate for equality and human rights, despite the obstacles and setbacks they face, embody absurd heroism. They are often confronted with seemingly insurmountable challenges: the entrenched systems of power and inequality, the indifference of those in authority, the frustration of seeing slow or minimal progress. Yet they continue, driven by a sense of purpose that transcends immediate results. The struggle itself becomes meaningful, and in continuing to fight, they affirm their commitment to justice and human dignity, even when success seems unlikely. In many ways, the absurd heroism that Camus describes is not about achieving a final victory or solving the existential puzzle of life. It is about the choice to live fully in the face of uncertainty, to keep moving forward despite life's apparent lack of purpose. It is about embracing the struggle itself and finding meaning in the act of living. Regardless of the outcome, this form of heroism is not about grand, dramatic gestures but about the quiet persistence of those who continue to push the boulder up the hill, day after day, even when they know it will roll back down again. Camus' absurd heroism speaks to the core of the human experience in a world that often feels chaotic and indifferent. It is a philosophy of resilience and defiance, a reminder that meaning is not something that can be found externally but something we create through our actions and choices. The absurd hero does not wait for the universe to offer answers. They create meaning by living authentically, by engaging with life's challenges, and by refusing to give in to despair. In this way, Camus offers a form of heroism that is deeply human, a heroism that is born from the acceptance of life's absurdity and the courage to live passionately despite it. In reflecting on the debate between Albert Camus and Simone de Beauvoir, we are presented with two distinct yet complementary perspectives on existence, freedom, and meaning. Camus, often associated with existentialism and the philosophy of the absurd, emphasizes the inherent meaninglessness of life. His exploration of the absurd, particularly through his famous work The Myth of Sisyphus, challenges individuals to confront the universe's indifference and live authentically, embracing the struggle without seeking false resolutions. On the other hand, Simone de Beauvoir, a trailblazer in existential feminism, expands existentialism to include social dimensions, focusing particularly on gender inequality. While both thinkers emphasize freedom, Camus posits it as a personal, internal rebellion, whereas Beauvoir underscores that true freedom cannot be realized without addressing the societal structures that restrict it, particularly those that oppress women. At the heart of their debate lies the notion of freedom, how we define it, how we achieve it, and how it interacts with the world around us. Camus, as the advocate for individual rebellion, presents a model of freedom that is forged through personal acceptance of life's absurdity. He suggests that despite life's lack of inherent meaning, we are still free to create meaning through our actions, through the way we choose to live. This rebellion against the absurd, symbolized by Sisyphus's eternal struggle, becomes the ultimate form of personal autonomy. Sisyphus, though condemned to repeat his futile task forever, finds meaning not in the task's completion, but in the very act of defiance against its meaninglessness. Camus' philosophy offers an empowering view, even in the face of an indifferent universe. We are not powerless. In fact, it is through embracing the absurdity of life that we can truly live authentically. Beauvoir, however, presents a critique of this individualistic view, particularly when it comes to the position of women in society. While Camus focuses on internal rebellion, Beauvoir emphasizes the importance of external social structures and their impact on individual freedom. Her groundbreaking work, The Second Sex, brings to light the systemic oppression that women face, showing that their freedom is not simply a matter of individual will, but rather a social and political struggle. Beauvoir's existential feminism challenges the assumption that freedom can be achieved through personal rebellion alone. She argues that women, historically defined as the other, are often socialized to accept their subjugation. This process of socialization, she contends, effectively restricts their ability to exercise genuine freedom. To truly be free, Beauvoir argues, women must break free from these societal constraints that define them in relation to men. This call for liberation goes beyond individual resistance. It is a collective effort that seeks to dismantle the patriarchal structures that maintain gender inequality. Both thinkers, then, grapple with the same existential questions: what is the meaning of life? And how can we live authentically in a world that often feels indifferent to our struggles? Yet their answers diverge sharply. Camus proposes that personal freedom, the ability to choose how we respond to the absurdity of life, is at the heart of meaning. For Beauvoir, however, freedom is a more collective matter, one that requires social and political change. She stresses that without addressing the societal structures that oppress individuals, particularly women, existential freedom remains elusive. Reflecting on these two perspectives raises fundamental questions about the nature of existence, personal autonomy, and social responsibility. How can we live authentically in a world that often feels meaningless or indifferent? How do we reconcile our individual freedom with the societal structures that shape our lives? These questions resonate deeply in a time when issues of personal identity, freedom, and social justice are more pressing than ever. Whether it's the fight for gender equality, racial justice, or the ongoing struggle for human rights, the tension between personal autonomy and social change remains central to contemporary debates. For individuals trying to navigate this tension, Camus' philosophy offers an appealing form of personal empowerment. His belief that we are free to create our own meaning in life, even in the face of absurdity, is a message that encourages resilience and self-determination. Camus calls for a form of rebellion that is not about external resistance but about embracing life fully and authentically, regardless of its lack of inherent meaning. This could be seen in the everyday struggles of people who continue to live with passion and purpose despite facing personal challenges. The artist who creates despite the world's indifference. The activist who fights for justice even when progress is slow. These individuals embody the absurd heroism Camus champions. They confront life's absurdity not with despair, but with a resolute commitment to living in accordance with their own values and choices. However, as Beauvoir reminds us, this individualistic approach does not account for the very real social forces that shape our lives. In a world where women, people of color, and other marginalized groups face systemic oppression, the question of freedom cannot be answered solely through individual rebellion. For Beauvoir, existential freedom is not just about making personal choices. It's about challenging and changing the external systems that limit those choices. Women cannot be truly free, she argues, as long as they are defined as the other by societal expectations and gender roles. Their freedom, therefore, requires not just personal rebellion, but also collective action to dismantle the societal structures that constrain them. In reflecting on the relevance of these philosophical debates in today's world, we can see how both Camus and Beauvoir's ideas continue to shape contemporary discussions about freedom, justice, and meaning, the ongoing fight for women's rights, racial equality, and other social justice causes underscores the importance of examining how societal structures influence personal freedom. Camus' individualistic freedom may appeal to those who seek personal empowerment in the face of existential challenges. But Beauvoir's call for collective liberation is a crucial reminder that true freedom requires addressing the broader social forces that define and restrict us. So, as we reflect on these philosophical debates, we must ask ourselves, how can we live authentically in a world that often feels meaningless or oppressive? How can we balance personal freedom with social responsibility in a world marked by inequality? Can personal autonomy truly be achieved without a collective effort to dismantle the societal structures that limit it? These are not questions that have easy answers, but they are questions worth grappling with. Camus and Beauvoir offer us different paths to freedom, one through personal rebellion and the other through social change. But both paths are necessary if we are to create a world in which all individuals can truly live authentically. The struggle for freedom is not just an internal battle, but one that requires us to challenge the external systems that define and constrain us. It is only through this dual approach, personal liberation and social transformation, that we can hope to create a world where meaning is not something imposed from the outside, but something that each of us has the power to create for ourselves. This reflection calls for deeper engagement with philosophy, not as a set of abstract ideas, but as a way to understand and navigate the world around us. I encourage you to think about your own life and the meaning you attribute to your actions. How do you define freedom for yourself? How do you balance the internal quest for authenticity with the external demands of social responsibility? These questions are crucial in shaping the way we live, both individually and collectively, in a world that often feels indifferent to our struggles. Take the time to reflect, to explore these ideas further, and to engage in conversation with others. Philosophy is not a solitary pursuit, it is a shared exploration of what it means to be human in an often challenging and uncertain world. We've journeyed through the complex worlds of Albert Camus and Simone de Beauvoir, two minds who looked at the absurdity of life from very different perspectives. Camus, the absurd hero, finding freedom in the rebellion against a meaningless universe, and Beauvoir, demanding that true freedom can only come when the societal chains, especially those that oppress women, are broken. Their ideas clash, yes, but they also complement each other in ways that challenge us to rethink how we live, how we find meaning, and how we fight for freedom. So, where does this leave us? Are we free to create meaning in a world that often feels indifferent to us? Or do we need to tear down the structures that confine us before we can truly be free? Perhaps the answer lies somewhere in between. Maybe the absurd hero's defiance against life's meaninglessness needs to be paired with the collective struggle. Beauvoir spoke of a fight to dismantle the very structures that prevent us from living authentically. As you reflect on your own life, how do you navigate this tension between personal freedom and social responsibility? How can you live authentically in a world that often feels overwhelmingly indifferent or oppressive? These questions aren't just philosophical, they're personal. And it's up to each of us to continue asking them, to challenge the systems that define us, and to embrace the absurd heroism that comes with living passionately, even when the universe offers no answers. If today's debate made you think, then don't stop here, take this conversation with you. Comment below with your thoughts on how Camus and Beauvoir's ideas might apply to your own life. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more thought-provoking discussions like this one. And if you really enjoyed today's video, consider showing your appreciation by hitting the super thanks button. Your support helps us keep exploring the big questions and bring you content that pushes the boundaries of philosophical thought. The search for meaning is a journey, not a destination, so let's keep exploring it together. See you in the next video.